On warm southern nights, when the air grew thick with cicadas and the sweet smell of cut grass lingered along the quiet streets, the little town of Brookhaven felt like a place where nothing truly bad could ever happen. Everyone knew everyone, and secrets, at least that's what people told themselves, had no room to hide. Church bells rang on Sunday mornings, kids rode their bikes in tight circles on cracked sidewalks, and the men from the factory liked to gather at each other's houses after long shifts, cooling down with beer and laughter that echoed across backyards. David Moore had been one of those men for as long as folks could remember. At 45, with broad shoulders built from years of the textile plant, he was steady, soft-spoken, and predictable in the kind of way small towns admire. He clocked in, clocked out, paid his bills, and joined his friends around a folding card table in the garage, tossing down poker chips with a grin that never seemed to wear thin. To the neighbors, David was the sort of man you waved at when you picked up your mail, the picture of an honest, ordinary life. Beside him stood Angela, his wife of nearly 2 decades. She was 42, with a sharpness in her eyes that made some people pause. She dressed neatly, kept their modest brick house tidy, and volunteered at the church bake sale every spring. To most of Brookhaven, she was the loyal wife who played her part well. But behind drawn curtains, Angela harbored a secret heavy enough to crush anyone who learned it. She lived each day with a diagnosis she never shared, a piece of her past locked away so tightly that not even David, the man she slept beside, the man she promised forever, knew the truth. For years, she carried it quietly, convincing herself it didn't define her. But secrets have a way of corroding even the strongest facades. When David came home smelling of oil and sweat from the factory, Angela watched how his attention slipped, how he seemed to save his best laughter for the nights with his friends rather than the dinner she set on their table. He loved her, yes, but in the easy, distracted way of a man who no longer noticed when his wife wore a new dress or changed her hair. Angela noticed. She noticed everything. The group of men David called brothers gathered every week without fail. 6 of them, all bound by the rituals of poker, cheap beer, and memories of growing up together in Brookhaven. There was Marcus, quick-tempered but loyal, Clarence, the loud storyteller, Jerome, always cracking jokes, Leon, steady and careful, Peter, the quiet one, and Travis, who never missed a night. They'd lean back in plastic chairs, ribbing one another about bad hands, while Angela slipped through the kitchen, refilling bowls of chips, hearing every word, feeling every pang of being left out of the camaraderie. Neighbors thought the Moores were blessed. The house was small but well kept, the yard trimmed, the couple seen side by side at Sunday service. But inside that picture-perfect frame, Angela's resentment was growing roots. She told herself she'd given David her best years, that she deserved more than to be treated as invisible. And with each passing poker night, as she caught the glances of his friends, some admiring, some lingering just a beat too long, she realized something. They weren't blind to her. They weren't deaf to her laughter or the way she leaned in when she refilled their glasses. The tension was subtle at first, like static in the air that no one mentioned. A brush of a hand when plates were cleared. A look held a second too long in the doorway. Brookhaven was the kind of place where temptation was supposed to be chased away with prayer, but temptation has sharp teeth when paired with secrets and quiet anger. Angela told herself she wasn't doing anything wrong. Not yet. She was still the faithful wife, the one who smiled in the pew, the one who baked banana bread for the potluck. But behind closed doors in the solitude of her bathroom mirror, she stared at her reflection and whispered the truth she could never say out loud. She wanted revenge. Revenge for the nights David forgot she was more than just his housemate. Revenge for the quiet loneliness of being taken for granted. And revenge for carrying a burden she never asked for, a burden that chained her life to silence. Out on the streets, the town kept moving with its usual rhythm. Kids chasing ice cream trucks, old men whittling on porches, gossip traded over fences. To them, David and Angela were just another married couple who'd weathered time. No one could see the cracks spidering across the walls of their home, or the storm Angela was quietly brewing in the corners of her heart. Because in Brookhaven, appearances were everything. And Angela knew better than anyone how to keep up appearances. What no one knew, what even David couldn't have imagined, was how far she was willing to go to make herself seen again, no matter the cost. Angela's plan didn't arrive all at once, like a bolt of lightning. It came slowly, like a storm creeping over the horizon, darkening the sky inch by inch. At first, it was just a thought that lodged itself in her chest during one of those poker nights. She watched David throw his head back in laughter, his friends slapping him on the shoulder as if he were the luckiest man alive, and she felt invisible. She carried his burdens, his meals, his laundry, his life. Yet in those moments, she might as well have been a ghost drifting in her own kitchen. That night, lying awake while David snored beside her, the seed took root. If he wanted to ignore her, if he wanted to treat her as though she were just a piece of furniture, maybe she would find another way to make her presence undeniable. Her secret, the virus she had kept hidden all these years, wasn't just a curse. In her darkest moments, it began to feel like a weapon. The first move seemed almost innocent. Marcus had lingered after a poker game, too drunk to drive home. Angela offered him coffee, her smile warm, her hand brushing his as she set the cup down. He looked startled, then flattered. Marcus had always been the brash one, quick with a laugh, quick with his temper, but he softened under her gaze. When she touched his arm, the spark was undeniable. By the time he left that night, Angela knew he would come back. Not for David, not for poker, but for her. It thrilled her, the control. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. She was wanted. And when Marcus returned a week later, slipping into the house while David worked the late shift, she didn't hesitate. It wasn't love. It wasn't even lust. It was vengeance, quiet and methodical. In the haze of tangled sheets, Angela's anger melted into something sharper, satisfaction. From there, the pattern became deliberate. Clarence, the loudmouth of the group, was easy prey. He'd always had a wandering eye, and Angela knew how to catch it. A laugh here, a compliment there, a low-cut dress on the night she brought out snacks for the table. It didn't take long before he found a reason to help her in the kitchen, his voice dropping, his jokes turning into something more suggestive. Angela played her part perfectly, hesitant, coy, then yielding just enough to make him believe he was the one pursuing her. Each man had his weakness. Jerome, with his endless jokes, longed for someone to take him seriously. Leon, cautious and careful, needed reassurance that no one would ever know. Peter, the quiet one, simply needed someone to listen. And Travis, who never missed a poker night, had a streak of recklessness Angela could spot from a mile away. One by one, she gave them what they thought they wanted, cloaking her true motive behind soft touches and whispered promises. In the dim light of her bedroom, Angela sometimes caught herself watching them, not as lovers, but as pawns. She didn't crave their affection. She craved the look on their faces when they realized she was no longer the woman they overlooked. And buried deep within her, a darker satisfaction hummed. The knowledge of what she was passing on, what invisible mark she was leaving behind. Her encounters became routine, almost ritualistic. She scheduled them like appointments, making sure David was gone, making sure no two men overlapped. She told herself she was careful, but in truth, the recklessness was part of the thrill. Every tryst was a knife twisting in the back of the man who had dismissed her, each encounter a silent declaration. I matter, and you'll never forget me. But revenge has a way of mutating, of growing larger than the one who wields it. Angela began to notice subtle shifts in her partners. Marcus, once confident, now seemed distracted, complaining of fatigue. Clarence had lost weight, his jokes thinner than before. Jerome coughed in his fist, wincing. Angela knew what was happening, even before they did. And instead of guilt, she felt a grim satisfaction. It was spreading, weaving its way into the fabric of David's circle, infecting not just bodies, but the bonds of friendship that had held them all together. On Sunday mornings, as she walked into church beside David, Angela felt the stares of women who whispered behind her back, stares she once despised. Now, she welcomed them. Let them talk. Let them envy her confidence, her sharp dresses, her glowing skin. None of them knew what she knew. None of them could imagine the storm she had set in motion, or the devastation that was about to unfold. At home, David remained oblivious. He came in from the factory with grease on his shirt, kissed her on the cheek without looking into her eyes, and settled in front of the television. He still called out to her when he needed another beer. Still chuckled at poker night stories retold over dinner. Still believed he was living a simple, ordinary life with a wife who would always be there. Angela smiled when he did, serve his meals, folded his laundry. But in her heart, she whispered the truth he would soon discover. The game had already begun, and he wasn't holding any of the cards. Because in Brookhaven, secrets didn't stay buried forever. And Angela Moore's secret, her carefully plotted revenge, was about to turn a small southern town inside out. It started with Marcus. He was the first to notice something wasn't right. A man who once strutted into poker night with his chest puffed out and his laugh echoing through the garage now sat hunched in his chair, his skin dull, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. He waved it off at first. Too many late shifts, too much beer, but his friends noticed the difference. The once quick-tempered, fiery Marcus had grown quieter, the edges of his voice softened by exhaustion. Then came Clarence, the loudmouth of the group, the one who told stories with his arms flailing and his voice booming, suddenly lost weight. His jeans hung looser, his cheekbone sharper. When he coughed into his hand, the others tried to ignore it, but the sound carried an edge that unsettled the room. Within weeks, Jerome was complaining too. His jokes, the glue of the group, had lost their punch. He wiped sweat from his forehead during poker games, even when the garage door was rolled open to the cool evening air. Leon, the careful one, confessed that he hadn't been feeling well either. Peter and Travis followed with their own quiet admissions. 6 men, all bound not only by years of friendship, but now by something none of them dared name. The doctor visits came next, whispered conversations none of them wanted to have. Each man sat in sterile exam rooms, staring at test results that confirmed their deepest fear. HIV. Not 1, not 2, all 6. The shock of it hit Brookhaven like a lightning strike. In a town where secrets struggled to survive, this was a wildfire. The men tried to keep it quiet, but rumors have wings in small places. Whispers spread at the factory, in the pews at church, around kitchen tables where neighbors leaned close over cups of coffee. Something was happening to David Moore's friends, and no one could understand why. At first, the men turned inward, desperate to find an explanation. They questioned each other, their voices sharp with suspicion. Marcus accused Clarence of bringing it into their circle. Clarence shot back, swearing he hadn't strayed anywhere dangerous. Jerome, hands trembling, admitted to nothing, but his silence was damning enough for Leon to slam his fist on the table. Peter and Travis sat in shock, barely able to speak. But then, slowly, the pieces began to align. They each carried shame they hadn't admitted, but there was one common thread that bound them all. A thread named Angela Moore. It was Peter, the quiet one, who first spoke it aloud. One night, his voice broke through the tension in the garage. What if it was her? Angela. The silence that followed was suffocating. One by one, the others met each other's eyes, the realization dawning like a cruel sunrise. Memories rushed back. Marcus remembering Angela's hand brushing his, Clarence replaying her laughter in the kitchen, Jerome recalling the way she leaned closer than necessary. Each man, thinking he was the only one, suddenly saw the truth. They weren't unique. They weren't special. They had all been drawn into the same web, trapped in the same betrayal. The fallout was immediate. The friendship they had built over decades began to unravel in that moment. The card games turned into shouting matches. Chips scattered across the floor as accusations flew. Marcus, his face red with fury, shoved Clarence against the wall. Leon cursed Jerome, his voice cracking. Travis stormed out, vowing never to come back. Peter buried his face in his hands. David was the last to know. He sat bewildered when the storm finally reached him. hearing the accusations spill from his friends' mouths. At first, he refused to believe it. Angela? His wife of nearly 20 years. The woman who sat beside him at church, who folded his laundry and kissed him goodnight. Impossible. But the evidence piled higher than his denial could withstand. 6 men, all with the same diagnosis. 6 men, all with the same story. And the one person tying them all together, Angela. The night David confronted her, the house felt like it had been hollowed out by fire. His voice shook, his hands clenched as he demanded the truth. Angela didn't flinch. She looked at him with a calmness that chilled him to the bone and said only, "You stopped seeing me." They didn't. That answer cut deeper than any blade. David staggered back, the walls of his marriage collapsing in on him. All the nights of trust, all the years of loyalty, reduced to ash by one woman's resentment. He thought of his friends, broken and betrayed. He thought of the whispers in town, the eyes that would never look at him the same way again. And for the first time, he realized he hadn't just lost Angela. He had lost everything. But Marcus's fury couldn't be contained by heartbreak alone. To him, this wasn't just betrayal. It was annihilation. His health, his future, his very identity had been stolen. And in his mind, there was only one way to even the scales. The seed of revenge that had once belonged to Angela now burned inside him, growing darker, sharper. Brookhaven buzzed with gossip as the scandal tore through the community. Some whispered Angela was a monster, a woman who had destroyed men's lives for sport. Others shook their heads in pity, saying she was a lonely wife driven to desperation. But for the 6 men at the heart of it, there was no room for pity. Only rage. The weekly poker games ended. The laughter died. Friendships that had spanned decades dissolved overnight. And in the middle of it all stood Angela, the woman who had set the fire and now watched the town burn. Marcus, more than anyone, felt the flames licking at his heels. And as the days turned into weeks, that fire began to consume him. David Moore had always believed that trust was something you built once and kept forever. He'd grown up in Brookhaven, gone to school with the same boys who later became his poker buddies, married Angela when they were both still young enough to believe in happily ever after. His world was steady, predictable, grounded in the comfort of routine. But now, sitting at the kitchen table with the blinds drawn tight and the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, he felt that foundation crack beneath him. The men he trusted most, his inner circle, had each confessed the same terrible secret. 6 friends, 6 diagnoses. HIV. And behind every admission, every trembling voice, one name had emerged again and again. Angela. At first, David clung to denial like a lifeline. He told himself they were mistaken, that there had to be some other explanation. Maybe they were lying to cover for each other's infidelity. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was anything but what they were suggesting, that his wife, the woman who prayed beside him on Sundays and folded his shirts with lavender-scented detergent, had slept with all of them. But denial can only hold for so long when the truth keeps pounding at the door. And in Brookhaven, the truth has a way of echoing louder than anything else. David began to notice the little things he had once ignored. The way Angela lingered too long in the kitchen on poker nights. Her laugh just a little too bright when Clarence cracked a joke. The flicker in Marcus's eyes when their gazes met across the table. The tension in the air when Jerome avoided conversation. These were moments David had brushed aside, chalked up to coincidence. Now, they became puzzle pieces snapping together into a picture he didn't want to see. One evening, unable to contain the storm inside him any longer, David confronted her. Angela stood at the sink, rinsing dishes, her back turned to him as if the weight of his anger couldn't touch her. His voice cracked as he asked, "Is it true? Tell me it isn't true." She dried her hands slowly, then faced him. Her expression wasn't guilty or frightened or even apologetic. It was calm, almost defiant. "You stopped seeing me, David." They didn't. The words struck him harder than any fist. It wasn't a denial. It wasn't an excuse. It was a verdict. Angela didn't even try to hide what she had done. In that moment, David realized the woman he thought he knew had vanished long ago, replaced by someone fueled by bitterness and spite. He staggered back, the air thick around him. "You destroyed them," he whispered, his voice barely carrying. "You destroyed us." Angela's eyes flashed, and for a moment, David thought he saw something close to satisfaction. "I didn't destroy anything," she said. "You did, when you forgot I was here." The marriage that had lasted nearly 2 decades crumbled in that kitchen, shattered beyond repair. For David, it wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. His friends had become her lovers. His wife had turned into their executioner. And the town that once saw him as a good, steady man now saw him as the fool who never noticed the fire smoldering inside his own home. But Angela wasn't finished. To her, this was never about guilt. It was about control. And the more David pulled away, the more she doubled down. When confronted by whispers at church, she lifted her chin higher. When neighbors looked at her with pity or disgust, she smiled as if they were beneath her notice. Meanwhile, the 6 men unraveled. Marcus raged, breaking chairs in his garage. Clarence withdrew, his booming voice reduced to a rasp. Jerome sank into silence, jokes dried up on his lips. Leon couldn't sleep. Peter stopped showing up to the factory altogether. Travis drank until he couldn't stand. Each one bore not just the weight of a diagnosis, but the shame of having been manipulated, betrayed, and exposed. Among them, Marcus's fury burned hottest. He replayed every moment with Angela, every smirk, every whispered promise, every lie. His anger became a living thing, pacing inside him like a caged animal. To him, Angela wasn't just a woman who had wronged him. She was the reason his life was ruined. And if David couldn't bring himself to punish her, Marcus told himself he would. The tension came to a head one night when the men gathered without cards, without beer, just silence and recrimination. Marcus slammed his fist on the table so hard the glasses rattled. "She killed us," he spat. "Maybe not with a gun, maybe not with a knife, but she killed us all the same." No one argued. No one dared. They all knew he was right. But knowing the truth and acting on it were 2 different things. Leon muttered that they should let it go, that nothing good would come from more violence. But Marcus's eyes had gone cold, and in that moment, the others saw something in him that chilled their bones. He wasn't going to let it go. Back at home, David sat in silence most nights, staring at the walls, his heart hollow. He had been betrayed by his wife, abandoned by his friends, ridiculed by his neighbors. When he walked into the diner, conversations hushed. When he passed the factory floor, men turned away. He bore the shame of Angela's choices as if they were his own. And yet, even in his grief, he didn't imagine the storm that was still coming. Angela believed she had won, that she had forced the town to acknowledge her, to remember her. But vengeance has a way of circling back. And for Marcus, vengeance had become an obsession. The truth was out now, undeniable and vicious. The only question left was how much more blood Brookhaven would have to spill before the town could bury it. The night it happened, Brookhaven was wrapped in a heavy summer heat. Cicadas screamed from the trees, and the street outside the Moore house sat still, the kind of stillness that makes every sound carry. Inside, Angela stood barefoot in the kitchen, the faint glow of the overhead light turning her shadow long against the linoleum floor. A half-finished glass of red wine rested on the counter, lipstick staining the rim. She moved lazily, humming to herself as though the world beyond her walls wasn't crumbling. But someone was watching. Marcus had been pacing his own living room for hours, his thoughts clawing at him like wild dogs. His diagnosis played on repeat in his mind, Angela's smirk replaying behind his eyelids every time he tried to breathe. His life, his health, his future, all shattered because of her. He remembered the way she had touched him, the way she whispered promises, the way she lied. Rage had been simmering for weeks, boiling hotter each day until finally there was no room left inside him. He wasn't just betrayed, he was marked, and the only way he could reclaim what she'd taken was to make her pay. Sometime after 11, Marcus slipped out of his house. He didn't slam the door, didn't even lock it behind him. He carried nothing but a kitchen knife, its handle wrapped in a towel to hide his prints. Each step toward the Moore house felt like a step toward release, toward justice, twisted though it was. Angela didn't hear the back door ease open. She didn't hear the heavy breaths of a man teetering on the edge of violence. By the time she turned, Marcus was already inside, his face drenched in sweat, his eyes wild. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady, though surprise flickered across her face. "You know what I'm doing here," Marcus growled. His knuckles tightened around the knife. "You ruined me. You ruined all of us." Angela tilted her head, almost amused, as though his fury were nothing more than a child's tantrum. "You think I'm the reason your life is falling apart?" she said, her tone sharp as glass. "You are all too easy, too weak. Don't you dare put this on me." The words were gasoline on his fire. Marcus lunged forward. The knife caught the kitchen light as it swung, plunging once, twice, again, and again. Angela screamed, the sound piercing the quiet street outside, but Marcus didn't stop. His rage had no brakes, no limits. Each thrust was fueled by weeks of humiliation, fear, and betrayal. By the time the neighbors heard the noise and peeked through their blinds, the damage was already done. Angela collapsed against the cabinets, blood pooling across the tiles, staining the hem of her nightdress. The wine glass shattered at her feet, crimson liquid mixing with something far darker. Marcus stumbled back, panting, the knife slick in his grip. For a split second, he stared at what he had done, horror flashing through his eyes. But then, as quickly as it came, the horror hardened into something else, grim satisfaction. He dropped the knife on the counter, his chest heaving, and stormed out the way he came. When the first patrol cars arrived, lights flashing blue and red across the quiet street, David was already in shock. He'd been upstairs, half asleep, when the screams tore through the air. He rushed down to find his wife sprawled on the floor, her body twisted unnaturally, her blood soaking into the linoleum. His cries echoed through the house, raw and broken. To the officers who burst in, the scene was chaos. The kitchen looked like a war zone. Chairs knocked over, counters smeared with blood, the floor sticky with it. And at the center, Angela Moore, unrecognizable from the woman they'd seen in church pews and supermarket aisles. Almost immediately, suspicion fell on David. He had motive, more motive than anyone. His wife had betrayed him, humiliated him, destroyed his circle of friends. The neighbors had already whispered about his short temper, though no one had ever seen him raise a hand to Angela. Still, in a town like Brookhaven, whispers carried weight. Detective Carla Hughes was called in before sunrise. A tall, sharp-eyed woman with years on the force. She studied the kitchen like it was a puzzle only she could solve. David sat slumped in the living room, his hands shaking, his shirt stained with his wife's blood from when he tried to cradle her. "Where were you tonight, Mr. Moore?" she asked calmly. "Upstairs," he croaked. "I was upstairs. I didn't hear him come in." Hughes pressed. David's eyes darted. He hadn't meant to say it, but deep down, some part of him knew exactly who was capable of this kind of rage. While forensics combed the kitchen, Hughes canvassed the neighborhood. One neighbor mentioned seeing a figure slip through the yard around 11. Another recalled hearing shouting, a man's voice, angry and broken. But the strongest lead came from a grainy clip of a doorbell camera across the street. Marcus's truck pulling up near the Moore house at the exact window of time Angela was killed. Back in the lab, fingerprints smeared on the knife matched Marcus. The towel he thought would protect him hadn't been enough. Blood spatter analysis confirmed a close-range assault, frenzied and uncontrolled, more consistent with a crime of passion than a calculated murder. When Hughes knocked on Marcus's door the next evening, he didn't fight. He just stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. "I had to," he muttered as the cuffs clicked shut. "You don't understand. She killed me first." The arrest sent shockwaves through Brookhaven. To the townsfolk, it was like watching pillars crumble. A wife who betrayed, a friend who murdered, a husband left standing in ruins. The gossip that once circled the Moore house turned into a storm, tearing through every diner booth and church pew. For David, the nightmare was far from over. His wife was gone. His best friend had become her killer, and the town he'd once called home now saw his life as the dirtiest scandal Brookhaven had ever known. In that bloody kitchen, under the harsh light of a single bulb, a cycle of vengeance had reached its breaking point. But for Detective Hughes, it was only the beginning of a case that would test not just the law, but the very idea of justice. Detective Carla Hughes had walked into dozens of crime scenes in her career, but the Moore kitchen stayed with her in a way few others had. The blood, the chaos, the sheer brutality. Everything screamed of rage, not calculation. Still, procedure demanded she consider every angle. And in Brookhaven, everyone already had their minds made up. Her husband did it. The whispers started almost immediately. People at the diner leaned over their coffee cups, recounting the scandal. Of course he did. Who else? Hughes didn't trust whispers. She trusted evidence. The first 48 hours were critical. Hughes sat across from David Moore in the cramped interrogation room at the sheriff's office, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He looked wrecked, unkempt, hollow-eyed, his hands trembling as he tried to explain. "I didn't touch her," he said over and over, his voice cracking. "She was already gone when I found her. I tried to help. I tried to stop the bleeding, but..." His words trailed off into silence. Hughes watched him carefully. His grief looked real, but grief and guilt could wear the same mask. "You had motive," she reminded him gently. "Your wife betrayed you with 6 of your closest friends. She humiliated you. She destroyed your marriage. That kind of pain can make a man snap." David dropped his face into his hands. "Do you think I didn't want to? God help me. There were nights I imagined it. But I couldn't. I loved her once. I couldn't do this." The medical examiner's report came back that afternoon. Angela had been stabbed over a dozen times. The wounds concentrated in her chest and neck. No signs of defensive wounds. She hadn't seen the first strike coming. The frenzied nature suggested an attack driven by fury. Still, there was more. Latent prints on the knife's handle. Hughes had them rushed through the lab. Hours later, the call came. The prints didn't match David. They matched Marcus Williams. Marcus. It wasn't a complete surprise. Hughes had heard his name more than once in her interviews with a group of friends. He'd been the loudest in his anger, the one who slammed fists and cursed Angela's name. But suspicion wasn't proof. She needed a case airtight enough to survive the courtroom, not just the gossip mill. She sent a team to pull surveillance footage from the surrounding houses. Most homes didn't have cameras, but one across the street did. The grainy black and white footage captured a truck pulling up near the Moore residence. Just after 11 p.m., Hughes recognized the shape of the vehicle immediately. It was Marcus's. Meanwhile, a neighbor recalled hearing a man's voice shouting inside the Moore home, followed by Angela's scream. He couldn't make out words, but the anger was unmistakable. Piece by piece, the puzzle took shape. Marcus's fingerprints on the knife, his truck on camera, a witness hearing his voice. When Hughes knocked on Marcus's door, he opened it slowly, as though he'd been expecting her. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped. Behind him, the living room reeked of stale beer and sweat. "You want to tell me where you were last night?" Hughes asked. Marcus rubbed his hands over his face. "You already know." "That's not how this works," Hughes replied. "Tell me." His eyes burned with exhaustion and rage. "She ruined me," he said flatly. "She ruined all of us. You think I could just live with that? Go on pretending?" His voice broke. "She gave me a death sentence. So I gave her one too." Hughes didn't flinch. "You're under arrest for the murder of Angela Moore." The trial that followed was unlike anything Brookhaven had seen in decades. The courtroom filled each day with neighbors, reporters, and family members, everyone desperate to glimpse the fall of a man who once sat at backyard poker games with a beer in hand. The prosecution painted Marcus as a killer consumed by vengeance. They displayed photos of Angela's wounds, the blood-soaked kitchen, the knife marked with his prints. They played the surveillance footage, grainy but damning, showing his truck pulling into view that night. They called witnesses who heard the shouting. Piece by piece, they constructed the image of a man who let anger eclipse his humanity. The defense told a different story. Marcus wasn't a cold-blooded killer, they argued. He was a victim pushed to the edge, a man who'd been lied to, manipulated, poisoned with a disease that would follow him to the grave. Angela, they said, hadn't just betrayed him, she destroyed him. And in that destruction, she lit the fuse of his rage. For weeks, the courtroom became a stage for the town's darkest secrets. David sat silently in the gallery, his face hollow, caught between grief for the wife he lost and disbelief at the man who'd been his closest friend. Detective Hughes took the stand, her testimony steady, clinical. She explained the evidence, the fingerprints, the surveillance, the witness accounts. She left no room for doubt. Marcus had been in that kitchen. Marcus had held the knife. Marcus had ended Angela's life. When the jury filed back into the courtroom, tension hung so heavy it felt suffocating. The foreman read the verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. Marcus's head bowed. Some said they saw relief in his posture, as if the weight of waiting had been heavier than the sentence itself. He was let out in handcuffs, his once bright future reduced to a number in the prison system. For Brookhaven, the case left scars that would never fade. The poker table where 6 friends once laughed sat abandoned. The Moore house, its kitchen tiles forever stained, became a cautionary landmark, whispered about by children riding bikes too close. And for David, life became a lonely echo. His wife was gone, his friends broken, his reputation shredded. Each time he walked into the grocery store, heads turned. Each time he bowed in church, he felt the weight of eyes on the back of his neck. Detective Hughes closed the file, another case solved, another killer behind bars. But as she looked out at Brookhaven, she wondered if justice had really been served. Angela betrayed. Marcus killed. David was left in ruins. The courthouse in Brookhaven had never seen so many people packed into its narrow wooden benches. On the morning of Marcus Williams's trial, the line to get through security wrapped down the block. Reporters from nearby cities set up cameras on the courthouse lawn, narrating for the evening news. To the town, it wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. Inside, the air was thick with whispers. Some came to see Marcus fall, others came searching for answers. And many came simply because they couldn't stay away from the spectacle of it all. The story of Angela Moore, the wife who infected 6 of her husband's friends, and Marcus, the man who finally snapped, had split the community right down the middle. David Moore sat quietly near the back, shoulders slumped, his face worn and gray. He had lost his wife to betrayal and his friend to rage, and now he was about to watch the justice system decide what scraps were left of his old life. The prosecution opened with stark brutality. Photographs of Angela's body were displayed on a large screen, her nightdress stained dark, the Moore kitchen looking like a slaughterhouse. The prosecutor's voice rang steady. This was not an accident. This was not a moment of weakness. This was rage, pure and simple. Marcus Williams took a knife into that kitchen and decided Angela Moore would not live another breath. Jurors shifted in their seats as crime scene photos flashed one by one. The forensic analyst described how the blood spatter patterns showed Angela had been cornered, struck again and again. The medical examiner testified that she had bled out in minutes, never standing a chance. Detective Carla Hughes walked the jury through the evidence. Marcus's fingerprints on the knife, the grainy video of his truck, the neighbor who heard shouting. Piece by piece, the puzzle left little room for doubt. Then it was the defense's turn. Marcus's lawyer, a wiry man with sharp eyes, stood before the jury and painted a very different picture. He didn't deny Marcus had killed Angela. Instead, he asked the jurors to see the man behind the act. This is not the story of a cold-blooded murderer, he said, his voice rising with emotion. This is the story of a man who was betrayed in the cruelest way imaginable. Angela Moore lured him into her bed, into her trust, only to leave him with a death sentence. She did it to him. She did it to 5 others. And then she smiled while their lives crumbled. Marcus Williams was not just a killer. He was a victim first. Marcus sat at the defense table, head bowed, hands clenched tight. His attorney called witnesses who testified to his change after the diagnosis, his weight loss, his outbursts, his drinking. A psychologist explained the spiral of rage and despair that can push someone into violence. Even his mother, voice trembling, told the jury, "My boy was good. He was loyal. She broke him." The prosecution pushed back hard. Yes, Angela had been cruel, even monstrous. But nothing excused murder. "We do not allow people to take the law into their own hands," the prosecutor argued. "No matter how angry, no matter how wronged. If we justify this, we justify chaos." The jury deliberated for 2 long days. Brookhaven held its breath. In diners, churches, factory lunchrooms, the debate raged. Some said Marcus deserved the harshest penalty, life for a life. Others whispered he shouldn't spend a day in prison, that Angela had dug her own grave. The town was divided, but it would be the 12 jurors who decided his fate. When they finally filed back into the courtroom, the silence was suffocating. Marcus stood, his knees trembling. The foreman's voice was steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus Williams, guilty of murder in the 2nd degree." Gasps rippled through the gallery. David closed his eyes. Marcus dropped his head into his hands. At sentencing, the judge addressed him directly. "Mr. Williams, this court recognizes the pain and betrayal that led to this act, but we cannot condone taking justice into your own hands. Angela Moore is dead, and you are responsible. You will serve 25 years in the state penitentiary." The gavel struck. It was done. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted. Some wept. Others shouted that it wasn't fair, that Marcus had already been punished by the disease Angela gave him. News cameras captured every moment, the story spreading far beyond Brookhaven. For David, the verdict brought no relief. He walked alone down the courthouse steps, ignoring the reporters' questions. He had lost his wife, his friends, his peace. The town that once felt safe now felt poisoned. Detective Hughes filed her final report, but even she couldn't shake the unease. Justice had been served in the legal sense, yes. Marcus was guilty, but the deeper questions remained. Who was truly the villain? Angela, who spread her vengeance like a plague? Or Marcus, who let rage consume him? Or was everyone, in some way, a victim of secrets and silence? Brookhaven would debate it for years, long after the trial was over, long after the Moore house was sold to strangers. And in the end, the scars of the case would remain etched into the town's history. A reminder that betrayal, once unleashed, rarely ends without blood. In the months after the trial, Brookhaven felt like a town living in the shadow of a wound that refused to heal. The courthouse steps, once bustling with reporters, stood quiet again, but the echoes of what had happened inside still lingered. Conversations at the diner still dropped to a hush whenever the name Moore or Marcus Williams slipped into the air. Neighbors still leaned over fences, voices low, debating not the facts of the case. Those were settled, but the morality of it all. David Moore lived like a ghost among them. He still clocked in at the factory, still bought groceries at the same store, but the man who once smiled easily, who once laughed around a poker table, was gone. People watched him with pity, some with suspicion, as though he carried part of the blame for what his wife had done. He hadn't raised his voice at Angela, hadn't raised a hand, yet the shame clung to him like smoke after a fire. His wife's betrayal wasn't just hers. It had stained his name, his marriage, his life. The house where it all happened became a quiet landmark, a symbol of tragedy. The new family that bought it tried to scrub away its history, repainting walls and laying new tiles in the kitchen, but the locals still drove by slowly, pointing at the windows, whispering that's where it happened. Kids dared each other to walk up the front steps at night. For Brookhaven, the Moore house wasn't just a home. It was a scar carved into the map of their town. Marcus Williams began serving his sentence in the state penitentiary, 25 years stretching out before him. To some, he was a monster who had taken justice into his own hands. To others, he was a broken man punished twice, once by Angela's actions and once by the law. Letters poured into the prison from both sides, strangers calling him a murderer, others calling him a hero. Inside those gray walls, Marcus carried the same rage, the same sickness, and the same unshakable belief that Angela had destroyed his life long before he took hers. For Detective Carla Hughes, the case was closed, but it left her unsettled. She had followed the evidence, built the case, secured the conviction. Justice, in a legal sense, had been done. And yet, each time she filed the case reports away, she couldn't shake the feeling that justice here was murkier than most. Angela had once been a victim, but now she had become the aggressor, spreading her pain deliberately, without remorse. Marcus had been both betrayed and betrayer. David had been the collateral damage. In the end, everyone had lost. The people of Brookhaven wrestled with their own judgments. Sunday sermons turned into debates about sin, punishment, and forgiveness. Was Angela's vengeance unforgivable? Was Marcus's crime somehow understandable? Could betrayal ever justify bloodshed? There were no easy answers, only opinions divided along the invisible lines that now cut through the town. And beneath it all lay the question no one could silence. Who was truly to blame? Was Angela's secret the spark? Was Marcus's rage the fire? Or was it something deeper, the culture of silence, the unwillingness to face hard truths until it was too late? For David, the answer never came. He stopped attending church, stopped joining conversations at the diner. His nights were quiet now, his days mechanical. Friends had once filled his home with laughter, his wife had once filled it with presence. Now both were gone, leaving only emptiness. Years later, when people looked back on the case, they didn't just remember Angela or Marcus. They remembered what it did to Brookhaven itself. How one woman's secret and one man's rage cracked a community in half, leaving scars that time couldn't fully erase. And that was the chilling lesson of the Moore case. Betrayal doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It infects. It destroys not just marriages and friendships, but entire communities. And when vengeance enters the cycle, the cost is always blood.